Today we're going to continue our series on love. Now we're going to back up a little bit because I really want to drive home the point that we made last week about being loved before we can love. Now, one of the points that we made was that you cannot give what you do not have, correct? You can't give what you don't have. As much as you would like to give, you can't give what you don't have. So if you don't have love, if you haven't experienced love, it's very difficult to give love. You don't quite know how to do it. You might have this emotion that overwhelms you every now and then that you just don't know how to express sometimes, but you just kind of, I call it throwing up. You know, you just have this emotion, so you just kind of throw up that emotion, and however it comes out is how it comes out. But the truth of the matter is that Paul here in 1 Corinthians 13 gives us some help about love. Now let's back up a little bit and remind ourselves of the church that he's talking about here. Remember, this is a church that's in a super pagan region. Okay, it's a place where the people were very successful. They were entrepreneurs. They had been at this place where travel went through, place where commerce went through. They were at a crossroads, really, of the culture. And so people came there in order to make money. And so they became very successful at what they did. They could help merchants go from east to west. They could help travelers go north to south. They could do all kinds of things right there in this little hub of commerce. They became very, very successful, and they kind of patted themselves on the back, and that's where God called Paul to start this church. Now I could imagine him saying, oh, you know, help me go someplace where people are real kind toward you, where people are real, you know, kind of affectionate toward what you are. Maybe go to the Jewish people. But God said, no, I want you to go to the Gentile people here. I want you to establish a church in Corinth. Now remember, we talked about how that had almost become a verb. To Corinthianize was almost a verb that meant that you could live without restraint. You could live without restraint. And so that's the kind of culture, this very pagan culture, was that Paul comes to establish this church. And so he comes and establishes it. And it becomes a thriving community of people who are followers of Christ. They became very gifted at what they did. They were very gifted people in their businesses and in their entrepreneurial endeavors. They were also, go figure, huh? They were also very successful in being powerful Christians. They had some very gifted things going on with them, and they were able to perform some great miracles. And so Paul comes to them and says, now if you can do all of that stuff but you don't have love, it doesn't amount to anything. He says, you just become a noisy gong or a clanging cymbal. A noisy gong or a clanging cymbal, which was emblematic of the culture of the time, in which this pagan culture were worshiping foreign gods, and they would come and they bang cymbals and they clang gongs, and they would try to arouse the affections of this deity that they were worshiping so they could appease him so he wouldn't do bad things to them. Now, he says, if you don't accompany your spiritual power with love, you become like a pagan just banging on a gong or clanging on a cymbal. So let's take a look at the scripture once again that we're looking at here in 1 Corinthians 13, 1 through 13. He says this to the church at Corinth. If I speak in the tongues of men and of angels, but have not love, I am a noisy gong or a clanging cymbal. And if I have prophetic powers and understand all mysteries and all knowledge, and if I have all faith so as to remove mountains, but have not love, I am nothing. If I give away all I have, and if I deliver up my body to be burned, but have not love, I gain nothing. Love is patient and kind. Love does not envy or boast. It is not arrogant or rude. It does not insist on its own way. It is not irritable or resentful. It does not rejoice at wrongdoing, but rejoices with the truth. Love bears all things, believes all things, hopes all things, endures all things. Love never ends. As for prophecy, they'll pass away. As for tongues, they will cease. As for knowledge, it will pass away. For we know in part and we prophesy in part. But when the perfect comes, the partial will pass away. When I was a child, I spoke like a child. I thought like a child. I reasoned like a child. When I became a man, I gave up childish ways. For now we see in a mirror dimly, but then face to face. Now I know in part. Then I shall know fully, even as I have been fully known. So now faith, hope, and love abide, these three, but the greatest of these is love. The greatest of these is love. Now remember, Paul's writing to a group of people that are very successful, and he's defining for them what love is. Now when we read this, we think it's very, very I don't know, it's very, very inspiring to find out what love is. And we use it a lot at weddings and stuff. In fact, I use it all the time at weddings. But Paul's really not defining for us here what the aspects of love are. He's not saying that in order to love, these are the behaviors that you must accomplish. He's not saying that at first. What he's saying is he's personifying love. You notice he doesn't say love acts patiently. He doesn't say that. He says love is patient. He personifies it. And what he's trying to get us to do is to meet love. He wants us to be hit in the face with love. And today we're going to look at that. Remember David Koresh several years ago, Waco, Texas? He had a cult following. One of the things that David Koresh says this to his followers is, are you really a Christian? The apostles of old used to heal the sick and raise the dead. They were spirit-filled men. What about you? Do you do these things? Do you do these things today? How can these stupid churches talk about the Spirit when they don't even do what the apostles did 2,000 years ago? So they sin against the Holy Spirit. They commit the unpardonable sin because they claim to be led by the Spirit when they're led by the devil. Now, David Koresh, his theology was a little bit off. And Paul would say to David Koresh, don't make the fateful error of confusing power as being more important than love. Don't confuse that. And that's really what Paul is saying as well to the church at Corinth. It's pretty interesting, because how do we define whether we're being led by the Spirit of God or not? How do we know that? Paul asks the same question. And the question becomes this, really. Not how much power do you have as a Christian, but how much love do you express with the power that you have as a Christian? Because as a Christian, as a follower of Christ, you have unlimited power. You have access to unlimited power because God is all-powerful. Okay? He has all the power. He can speak creation into being. That's a pretty powerful God. And you have power available to you. But the question Paul really reminds the Corinthian church is, how do you use that power? Are you using it in love, or are you just being a noisy gong and a clanging cymbal? So Paul personifies love here, and he says, love is. Love is patient. Love is kind. Love is. And he says, this is what love is. And so he hits us right in the face with what love is. Now, love defined in a nutshell is this. Love never, ever, ever, ever gives up. It does not quit. And at the end of this description of love, Paul says, love never fails. It doesn't stop. Okay, when you're encountering someone that you're expressing love toward, you don't get to a point where you say, I don't love you anymore. I just don't love you anymore. And one of the reasons for that is because we love kind of imperfectly, don't we? When we think about the love that we express, we love things that are lovely, don't we? Okay, when you first met your spouse, when you first met the first dream love that you had of your life, what was it that you loved? You loved their loveliness at first, probably. Don't you think? Okay, and there's some people that can appear lovely and turn out not to be so lovely down the road, right? And so when they don't appear lovely anymore, what happens to our love? It runs out. Paul says that that's not true love. True love never fails. Okay? So now, let's figure out how we can love perfectly. First of all, to love perfectly, we must be judged by the definition of love. We have to be judged by it. Paul says in verse 3, he says, if I give away all I have, and if I deliver up my body to be burned, but have not love, I gain nothing. He says, love has to accompany the activities of your life, or it is worthless. As a believer, as a follower of Christ, you can do a lot of things. And in the end, those things are going to be evaluated. We're going to stand before God, and we're going to be evaluated. We're going to be judged. And the way that Paul describes this judgment is that all of your activities of life are going to be thrown into this fire. Okay? And some of that stuff is going to be burned up like wood, hay, and stubble. Okay? Have you ever seen straw burn up? It's just gone. It goes. And he says some of the stuff we've done in life are going to be like that. There's going to be no reward for it. He says other things that come out of that, when you put silver into a fire, you know what happens to silver? It gets refined. Okay? It boils. I don't know what the metallurgists call it, but it becomes liquid, and all the scum comes to the top. That's my way of describing it. Okay, and then they skim that off, and the heat purifies it. And what happens in this judgment that we will experience is that God will keep all of our good deeds, so-called good deeds. Some of them get burned up because they were good deeds only in image, not in love. And so those get burned up. They were worthless. Noisy gong, clanging cymbal. Then he says there's some that are going to come out like precious jewels. It's going to come out like gold and silver that gets refined by the fire. And he says those are the things, and the implication here is those are the things that you did, not only did the right thing, but you did it with the right motive, the motive of love. So we get really big on evaluating what we do, don't we? You know, you look at your last work week, you know. I look at my last work week and I say, oh, you know, I did this and this and this, and I thought those were really pretty cool things. I helped out this guy over here and he did this, and I kind of pat myself on the back, you know. And, you know, then I have to ask myself the question, why did I do what I did? Why did I help that guy out at work? Was it because I wanted him to think I'm a good guy? And so therefore I get something out of that? Paul would say that that's not true love. That's not perfect love. Because when we love for the motive of getting something in return, love doesn't seek its own, is what he says. Love doesn't look for the return on the investment, but it looks for a pure motive of, I love this person for who they are, not for what they can do for me. Now, let's go on here for a minute. And it probably best be illustrated with a story. There's a story about a king, and he's got his little kingdom here, and there was a farmer in his kingdom. The farmer was an agricultural farmer, and so he grew carrots. And all of a sudden he discovered this one carrot that was in his garden, and he found this carrot, and it was just a huge carrot, just a gigantic carrot. And he says, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to take this to my king. I'm going to give it to him as a symbol of my love and esteem for him. So he digs this carrot up, and he takes it to the king, and he says, my liege, I want to give to you this present as a token of my affection and love for you, and as a symbol of esteem. And he gives it to him. Now, when he's in the courtyard there, giving this carrot to the king, there's a nobleman standing close by. And he's observing what goes on. And the king says to the farmer, he says, you know, your love is important to me. It's valuable to me. So what I'm going to do for you is I'm going to give you a double portion of land. I'm going to double your holdings here in land, and your farm is going to grow 2 times. The nobleman says, I see something here. And so as a nobleman, he had some very fine horses. And he goes back to his little nobledom, and he gets in there, and he finds the stable, and he goes in there, and you know, he's got guys working there. He doesn't know much about it. So he gets this very fine horse. And he comes to the king, and he says, oh, my liege, the king, I want to give you this symbol of my esteem for you. It's the finest horse I have ever produced. And the king says, get away from me. Get out of here. Because you're giving to me as an investment for a return. The king was smart. He could see past the thing. And the guy says, oh, but the guy that gave you a carrot, this horse is worth way more than a carrot. Why can't, what's the deal? He says, the farmer gave to me out of his heart because he loved me. He gave me his best. And you have given me a trade. You want to trade your horse for some land. I get nothing from that. And so he says, go away. Now, that little story there should help us to understand what love really truly is all about. It's not an investment we make for a return. It is a symbol that we love somebody simply for who they are. And when it comes to God, let me ask you, why do you pray? Hey, why do you pray? Don't answer out loud. Just kind of think about that for a minute. Why do you pray? Number 2, why do you read the Bible? Number 3, why do you give? You know, those of you who contribute to church, why do you give? Number 4, why do you even come to church? Why do you come? Now, some people would say, I do all of that because it will gain God's favor and he will smile upon me and he'll make my path straight. He'll take care of me. Wrong answer. Paul says here, if we're doing those things for an investment so that we can get a return, it is not done out of love. And I talk to people a lot about loving God, and they say, man, I just don't know how to love God. I don't know how to do that. And I ask them, what has God done that would cause you to love him? And they say, I don't know. I don't get it. I said, let me give you a couple of things. Number 1, He came to this earth in the form of a baby so that at the end of his life, he could sacrifice his life so that you could receive forgiveness of sin. Let me just ask you a question. How much sin have you done? How much wrong stuff have you done? And we don't have to go into some elaborate definition of what sin is, and I'll just give you a quick one. Sin is knowing what's right and not doing it. Okay? Knowing what is right and not doing it. That's what sin is. So what have you done that you would say you knew what was right and you didn't do it? Oh, okay, I can figure something out. Okay, and I said this. The second thing is that the person who has been forgiven much loves much. The person who has been forgiven little loves little. So count what you've been forgiven. And it should cause the love for God, to grow within you. When you see what he has done, when you experience his love, and when you experience his forgiveness, it will cause you to love him. Cause you to lean into him. Cause you to be connected to him. So what do we have to do? We have to do what Paul says here. We have to be judged by this image of love. How many of you, and don't raise your hand, please, because if anybody raises their hand, I'm going to have to say, no, you don't. Okay. And I don't want to say that. Now, how many of you have loved perfectly? Throughout your entire life? Nobody has. Nobody has loved perfectly. That's why we have to be confronted with this thing called love. Why do we do what we do? Now, Jesus can be several things. Sometimes Jesus can be an obstacle to us, can't he? And sometimes we get this thing where and for believers not so much, but for non-believers, the image of Jesus can become an obstacle. I don't want to be judged. I don't want to be condemned. I don't want to be whatever. And so we avoid Jesus. A lot of non-believers do. Or he can become a means, a means to an end. Okay, I will get connected to Jesus so that I can get something in the end. So I can get peace of mind, so I can get whatever. But the truth of the matter is that what he wants us to do is to love him for who he is. Now here's a question that I want you to respond with. What is Jesus that you could say, I'm going to use one word to describe Jesus and God. We can put them together in this. What is one word that you would use to describe them? Savior. Okay, good one. Good one. What else? But now, think about this. If I love Jesus because he is my Savior, we say that a lot, don't we? Do I love him because of what I've gotten from him? The salvation? Let me think. What is it? How do we define ourselves? This is a hard question, I know, but we need to think about this. How do we define ourselves? We define ourselves by what we do, right? I'm a car salesperson. I am a pastor of a church. I am a husband to Cindy. I'm a father to my children. I am these things. We define ourselves based on function. But I want you to start defining yourself based on who you are. What is the character that makes you up? Okay? What is your character makeup? Are you honest? Are you trustworthy? Are you faithful? Those are the things that you are. Now, if we can separate from God what he does, which is some tremendous things. Don't get me wrong. I don't mean to minimize that. But let's define him in terms of who he is. One of the things that comes to my mind is that he is holy. He is holy. You know why we don't bask in the holiness of God as much as we should? Because it shows how unholy we are. By comparison, we pale in significance, right, when it comes to holiness, correct? Okay, so to think about God's holiness is to maybe be a little self-condemning and say, I'm not that. I'm not that. But when we start to realize that God's holiness is really a pretty incredible thing, think about this. God's holiness means that he does everything perfectly. Okay? Everything perfectly. He's morally perfect. In the execution of what he does is perfect. Everything he does is perfect. Now, if I have a God who does everything perfectly, and I am a person upon whom God acts, he guides my life. He causes things to happen in my life. He is a sovereign God. And so I can look at the things that happen in my life as, that's from God. God has allowed that to happen for a purpose. Nothing becomes insignificant. Nothing becomes purposeless. So God is holy, and he has done everything perfectly. So whatever happens to me, if I get sick or if I get well, whatever happens to me is part of his plan. I can rest in that. I have a great deal of love for God in that. I can go, I don't have to worry. Is God going to take care of me? God is taking care of me right now. He has caused these things to happen for a purpose in order to bring prominence and recognition to him. So therefore, whatever happens in my life, when I had cancer, it was an interesting thing for me. Because I thought, oh, God needs to rescue me from this. But if I really look at it, from a perspective of perfect love, God has allowed this to happen to me for a purpose. Now, what I do with this thing here is going to determine whether God's purpose gets accomplished or not. If I cooperate with him in it, his purpose will be accomplished. People will be known about him. My faith in him, my trust in him will cause other people maybe to have faith and trust in him. But whatever comes out of it, I have to see as an action of God. So, I say all of that to say, C.S. Lewis gave us a quote. And this quote from C.S. Lewis is this: if you do someone a kindness to show him or others or yourself what a fine chap you are. Now, C.S. Lewis was a British guy. What a fine chap you are, to put him in your debt, and then to sit down and wait for his gratitude, you will be very disappointed. All natural affections are idolatrous and need to be purified. So if I do something kind for you so that I can receive your attention, so that I can receive your praise, so that I can even receive your gratitude, C.S. Lewis says, you need to be purified from that, because that's not perfect love. Because it's an investment and you're expecting a return. Okay. Now, how do you know if you're loving perfectly? How do you know if you're loving perfectly and if you've been confronted by this thing of the judgment of the definition of love? Okay. I would say this: how you respond to people that you do a kindness for, okay, that you love, you do somebody a loving action, and let's say they don't say thank you. Let's say they don't even recognize it. How do you respond to that will tell you if you're loving perfectly. If you get upset and you get unhappy, then you were expecting a return on your investment, right? You were expecting some gratitude. Okay? That's not perfect love. Perfect love doesn't seek a return. Okay? Perfect love says, I'll love you for who you are, and I'll do this exercise of love in your life. I'll be patient with you. I'll be kind to you. I'll do whatever. And I don't expect a return. So that'll tell you if you're loving perfectly. Now, let the definition of love judge you. Let me catch up here in a minute. Okay? Why do you do what you do? Are you expecting a return, or are you just loving someone for the sake of who they are? Okay. Number 2, to love perfectly, I must not only be judged by the definition of love, but be embraced by love. I have to experience love. We talked about this a little bit last week. Before Paul says, do these activities, do these behaviors of love, he says, first of all, you need to look at it. You need to be embraced by it. You need to be loved by the only one who is truly perfect and loving. Now, how can we do this perfect love and do the for all things? Remember, back there, if you look back in your first page of your outline, it says this. At the end, in verse number 7, it says, love bears all things. Okay? Love bears all things. It believes or trusts all things. It hopes all things and endures all things. Love never ends. Okay, there, verse 7 and 8. Okay, we have that up here. But to be embraced by love, we have to understand 2 things about Jesus. Number 1, Jesus is God. Now, we could spend a whole series talking about the 2 parts of Jesus, his humanity and his divinity. But we're just going to put it out there, and you're going to trust me on this one. Jesus is God, okay? So now, as God, what does that bring to the table of being embraced by God? Okay? What is it about God that says he loves us perfectly? Well, let me tell you some things about God. Number 1, God doesn't need anything from us to be God. Okay? We don't contribute anything to him in order for him to be God, correct? He's God all by himself. And if you think there's something that you can contribute to him that would make him more godly, you're sorely mistaken, because we can't. He is God. He was God before he ever created anything that we know of. And he is God today. So there's nothing we can give to him to make him God. Now, the cool thing about that is that because there's nothing we can give to him, that means there's nothing that he's expecting for us to return to him in order for him to love us. He loves us whether we return it or not. Now, who does God love? He loves everybody, right? He loves everybody, whether they're followers of his or not. Paul says this, but God demonstrated his own love toward us in that while we were still far apart from him, still sinners, still unconnected to him, He died for us. Okay? While we were still sinners, Christ died for us. He wasn't waiting for us to be lovable. He wasn't waiting for a return, but he still died for us and showed the ultimate action of love while we were still sinners. Okay? Now, he can love us perfectly because he needs nothing from us. Have you ever thought about manipulation? How do you manipulate people? I work in an industry where it is honed to a fine craft. Okay, manipulation. And if you ever come buy cars from me, I won't do that. But that's the way you're encouraged to manipulate these people. Get them to do whatever you need them to do in order to put down their money for a car. Now, how do you do that? You convince them that you love them, that you're concerned about them, that you want the best for them, that you're on their side, so that you can get a return from them. And we don't have to convince God that we're on his side, or God doesn't have to convince us that he's on our side so that he can get a return from us. He doesn't manipulate us. He is God whether we love him or not. He doesn't need anything from us to be God. It doesn't improve his status when we do love him. But we love him. Why? Because of who he is, not for what he does. Big difference. Big difference. Loving God for who he is. And so your homework this next week is write down 5 things about God, 5 things that you admire about God, that you love about him. And don't make those 5 things that he does. Make it things that he is. God is love. God is holy. God is sovereign. Okay, I'm going to give you 3 things, and I want you to contemplate those this next week. And add a couple to it so that you can say, I love God for who he is, not just for what he does. Now, granted, I don't want to minimize what he does for us. Don't get me wrong, because he does a great deal for us. But loving him for who he is a big difference. Okay? The second thing, Jesus is man. Okay? When Jesus came to the earth, he was born of a woman, right? He was a little baby. He grew up just like all of us. Well, probably not just like all of us, but he grew up. He got bigger. Okay? And some of us still are. But he grew up, and he became a man. Now, what does this tell us about the purity of his love for us? Now, think about what he did at the end of his life. When he went to the cross, there's this certain scene in there, and Jesus is hanging on the cross, and he says, my God, why have you forsaken me? Why have you forsaken me? And what would there be that's going on here that would cause Jesus to think that God has forsaken him? Well, let me give you a couple of things. Number one is that he's bearing all of the sin of mankind. All of the sin of mankind. He's taking the punishment for all of that. And God has just heaped it upon him and made Jesus this sacrificial lamb that has sacrificed his life for the sheep that need his forgiveness. Okay? So he has heaped all of this sin upon Jesus. He says, my God, why have you forsaken me? And for a brief period of Jesus' life, he is excluded from the presence of his Father. He says, why have you turned your back on me? Why am I not connected to you? Why am I doing this? Now, Jesus knew why he was doing it. He said, my God, why have you forsaken me? Now, if I'm Jesus, I know that within 3 days, I'm going to be raised from the grave, and I'm going to be reconnected with my Father. Do you think that you could just kind of gut it out for 3 days? You know, if you're Jesus, do you think you could gut it out for 3 days and just say, okay, well, I can be outside of my Father's presence for 3 days? You know, do you think you could do that? In fact, most of us do that pretty frequently. You know, we act as if God is not present. You know, we act as if God's not present. And so we're just going about our own thing. And do you think you could do it for 3 days? Yeah, probably. We could do it for 3 days. And we say, well, what's the big deal about Jesus being outside of the presence of God for 3 days? I'll tell you this. He knows what it's like to be in his presence. Jesus knew what it was like to be in the presence of God. He knew what it was like to be in communion with God. He knew what it was like to be perfectly connected to his Father. He knew what it was like. And he says, I don't want to be disconnected for a millisecond. I don't want to be disconnected for a millisecond, much less 3 days. I know what it's like, that connection. And so I say to you, Jesus bore all things. Remember the all things of verse number 7? Jesus, he says, he personifies love for us here, and he says, it bears all things. What did he bear? He bore the weight of all of our sinfulness. He bore the disconnection from his Father. He bore that, okay? What did he trust? He trusted all things. It says this next thing is love trusts all things. Jesus is demonstrating his love for us, hanging on the cross, and he says, I trust that my Father will do what's right. I trust that. Now, it's one thing to say, I trust God, when things are going smoothly. Correct? It's another thing to say, I trust God when things are going down the toilet. And for Jesus, this had to be kind of an experience that I would describe as going down the toilet. I mean, I'm disconnected from my Father. I've got the weight of all of this sin that I've never committed, and I don't even know what the weight of sin feels like. And now I've got all of mankind's sin on my shoulders, and I'm disconnected from my Father. What could be worse than that? But he says, I trust my Father that in the end, things are going to work out. Then he says that there's a third all here, and the third all is that it hopes all things. Remember, this hope is this settledness. Hope is settledness. It's not just, gosh, I hope, I wish, I think, I'm just on the edge of my seat. Hope here, as described for love, means that there's a settledness about what's going on and the person that I love. A settledness. I don't have to change him. I don't have to convince him. I don't have to change what God's doing, is what Jesus says. I'm settled with what he's brought to me. I'm settled. So it hopes all things. And then what does it say at the end? It endures all things. Jesus endured the ultimate. And because of that, he can say, I love you. Perfect. Perfect. So we see here that Jesus is man, so therefore he can love us perfectly because he endured all things. He loves us perfectly because he endured all things. He showed us what love is. Now, how do we get embraced by that? How do we get embraced by that? God's love is available to you today. God's love is available. All you have to do is access it. All you have to do is say, I let you love me. I will let you love me. And I will take what you've done on the cross. I'll apply it to my life. And I'll follow you. Hey, now, Jesus doesn't love us for a return, but he wants us to live lives that are meaningful and purposeful. And so following him is kind of like reading the owner's manual of your car. When something's wrong with your car, the first thing you do is go to the owner's, oh, that's how it works. Well, that's what the Bible is for us. It's an owner's manual. It tells us how to live life. And it's a pretty simple thing. It's not hard to understand. He just says, follow me. Follow me. And after you've received the forgiveness of your sinfulness, follow me. Okay. Now, there's another thing here that we want to talk about just for a brief moment. And that is, here. Love bears all things, believes all things, hopes all things, endures all things. Just a little bit behind it. Okay. To love perfectly, I must be empowered by love. Okay. So I need to be judged by it, I need to be embraced by it, and I need to be empowered by it. In 1 Corinthians 13:6, it says this. It says, it, speaking of love, does not rejoice at wrongdoing, but rejoices with the truth. Now this is where we start practicing love. Okay? First we have to be judged by it and realize we come up woefully short on love. So we need somebody to display to us what love is all about, and that's what Jesus does. So we get embraced by that. We become followers of him, and he embraces us with that love. And then the third thing is that it empowers us to do something. And there's two things here that it empowers us to do. Now, it says, first of all, that it rejoices with the truth. Okay? Rejoices with the truth. Now, what that word rejoices with, that phrase, rejoices with the truth means, is that it sings along, love rejoices, or sings along with the truth that's already singing. Okay? Now, truth is singing. Okay? Now, what is the truth? The truth, Jesus says, I am the way and the truth and the life. Okay, Jesus is the truth, and he's singing right now. The truth is singing. Okay, what is the truth? The truth is, in my sinful condition, I'm a big fat sinner. Okay, the truth is, Jesus came to die so that I could forgive my sin. Okay, he gives me opportunity to follow him. Okay, that's what the truth is. And so he says that truth is singing. Now, if you want to sing along with it, you're welcome to do so. You can sing along with the truth by cooperating with what the truth is. So therefore, Jesus says, I'm the way, the truth, and the life. No one comes to the Father except by me. Okay, I sing with that. I can't come to God apart from Jesus. And Jesus shows me how to live. I want to sing along with that. Jesus says I should have compassion for those who don't know him. I want to sing along with that. He says I should love everyone all the time. I want to sing along with that. That's what love, rejoicing in the truth, is all about. Singing along with the truth that's already singing. So I have to tune my voice to his. Have you ever sat in front of somebody that's really a good singer? That's why I sit in the front, because I'm a pretty rotten singer. And when I sing, I sometimes sing real loudly, much to your chagrin. But I sing loudly because the person behind me has a beautiful voice. I just they sing kind of through me, you know? And I go, oh, and I go, oh. And that's why I like it when Clarissa, I sit on this side because that's the only speaker that works. And so as Clarissa's singing, and I go, oh, and really I'm going, but it sounds like Clarissa, when I sing. I'm singing along with what is good. And that's what Jesus says, is I want you to sing by your life along with what is good. So follow me. I'll show you what's good. I'll show you what's true. I'll show you what's right. And you sing along with that. By doing it, you're going to be in the right spot. You're going to be able to then be loving toward other people. When I meet people, I go through this conscious thing. When I meet a customer on the showroom floor, I go through this conscious thing. Hey, what does Jesus want me to do with this person? Now sometimes, don't tell my boss, sometimes what Jesus wants me to do is to tell them to get their car fixed because it's going to be cheaper. Okay? Sometimes that happens. And you're honest. I've done that before because that's what Jesus wants me to do. Now, my boss would probably say, Mike, you're fired. You didn't make me any money. You're fired. So I don't tell him I do that. But actually, I do. I tell him sometimes. But the truth of the matter is that when we sing along, when we want to rejoice in the truth, that's the practical way that we can do it. What encounter do you face, and then ask, what does Jesus want me to do here? Remember the bracelets, WWJD? What would Jesus do? It's that simple. Now, you have to know Jesus fairly well to know what he would do, right? You have to know what his heart is. You have to know what he's all about. You know that he's about redemption. You have to say, okay, the ultimate goal is for this person to become a follower of Christ. And so therefore, how can I move them toward that? How can I move them toward that? Okay. Now, it rejoices with the truth. Okay, so there's two things here. Number one, rejoicing with the truth, which is singing along with what is true. The second thing here is a little bit tougher, and it's the first part of the verse. It does not rejoice at wrongdoing. Okay? Does not rejoice at wrongdoing. So first of all, the way we love is affirming the loved one's value. Okay? The loved one's value. Now, be careful here because this could be self-serving, couldn't it? Yeah? Why do I love Cindy? I love Cindy because she is a beautiful woman. Okay? I like looking at her. Okay? That means don't get nervous about that. Okay? I like looking at her because it's pleasing to me. Now, is that self-serving a little bit? Yeah. I love her because she is an excellent cook. I'll tell you what. She made steak tacos the other night that actually died. Okay? Is that self-serving? Yeah. I love her because she is a hard worker, goes to work every day. Is that a little self-serving? Yeah. Because I get her to fix that paycheck. Okay? And I get the benefit of that. Okay? I love her because she is trustworthy. I love her because she is faithful. I love her because she is always okay? That's different, isn't it? So when we affirm someone's value, it's not you're valuable to me because you do these things for me. You're valuable to me because you show me who Jesus is. We had some friends the other day. They called and they talked to another friend and they said, hey, where's Mike? And we got reconnected. They called. And the next day they called back and said, hey, I want to send to you some money for your church. I said, oh, that'd be very cool. Okay, yeah. Where would I send it? What's the church address? Well, it's my home address. And they said, okay, we'll send it there. So they sent us this very generous gift to the church. And I wrote them back. And I wanted to thank them for their gift. But I wanted to express my love for them. I love you because you sent me a check for $1,000 for the church. I shouldn't have said them out. But you sent me a check for that, and I love you for that. Is that self-serving? So what I did instead was I reminded them of the attributes of Christ that I saw in their actions. Man, your generosity reminded me of Christ. into the ultimate sacrifice of the cross. I affirm their generosity. I affirm their faithfulness to me, friendship to me. Those kinds of things. And so it's different. Affirming someone's value is affirming who they are, not just what they've done. Okay? So affirm who they are. There's another thing here, and this one is a little bit tougher. Okay? Confronting the loved one's sinfulness. Right here it says, it love does not rejoice at what? Wrongdoing. Doesn't rejoice at wrongdoing. Now, when we love perfectly, when we grow in this perfect love, we not only have the ability to affirm someone's value, which is the easy part of love, but we also love this person so much that we don't want to see him to continue to mess up. Okay? Now, hear me clearly. There are people that are not followers of Jesus Christ, right? There are. Okay? Don't go confront their sin. Okay? Don't confront their sin, their individual sins. Don't do that. Because then you become judgmental. But when someone's a follower of Jesus Christ, and they are your brother or your sister, it is our responsibility and privilege to love them so much that we don't want to see them do wrong. Okay? Now, when you confront someone, make sure it's not for your own self-serving purposes. And I can fall into this. Me and driving, right? Somebody cuts me off. I'm praying for the highway patrolman, right? To show up. And then when I drive by, I might even give them a little honk if they've been pulled over, which I'll admit to you, I have done that. I'm not proud of it, but it's really not very funny. But kind of is. But don't do that, because that's self-serving. That's not love. We can be altruistic, and we can say, oh, I want them to be safe, and so where's the highway patrolman to create safety for them? No, that's usually we're just kind of mad, and we want them to pay a penalty. Make sure that when you confront someone, it is done with the right motive, the motive of love. In Matthew, it tells us that if your brother has sinned, go confront them in private. Okay, go confront them in private. If that doesn't produce the right result, take someone with you to confirm every fact. And then if that doesn't produce the right result, bring that to the church so that the church can lovingly confront them. Okay? Don't do it harshly. Okay? I was part of a church in which it was done harshly. And it was done to remove someone from the church. It wasn't done to restore them. It was an ugly scene, and shame on the church. Shame on the church that allowed that to happen. It was not done in love. And so it was a what? Noisy gong and a clanging cymbal, and it was probably worse than that because it gave us a big fat black eye. Okay? So don't do it for self-serving purposes. But do it because you love someone so much that you want to see them live the best life they possibly can. Now, perfect love happens when we can do both of those things. When we can affirm the loved one's value, and when we can lovingly confront their sinfulness.